What's going on, everyone? So it's been a crazy end of the week. We got so many new cards to talk about, including a new leader. That's super exciting. One of the best leaders I've seen from set 3. Bunch of new exploit stuff. We're going to dive right into it because I said we have tons of cards to talk about. Big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and use my TCG player link for any Star Wars Unlimited cards. Let's talk about our first card in multi-troop transport. 7 cost ground unit, vigilance, 3/6 separatist vehicle tank. It's got exploit 2. And on attack, you can create a battle droid token. So there's two things with this. One, it's an exploit card. So how good is it to exploit this out, and how well is it to set up / what are the benefits for doing so? We got a lot of exploit synergy in this last kind of weekend, or I guess you should say the end of this week, so the last couple of days. So it kind of encourages me with the exploit cards. This to me is on the weaker side of things. The couple of nice things about it is that you can play it for 3 resources if you do exploit 2, because it'll cost 4 less. And if you do get this down on, let's say, turn 2, it can be pretty decent and can provide you a lot of fodder for future exploits by creating a battle droid token. Generally speaking, I don't think it's going to be pretty common to cast this, to play this on turn 2. I'm thinking more turn 3, turn 4. And that's just not like that great. It does have a stat line where it will survive most things. Doesn't get hit by Fill the Dragon, doesn't get hit by Vanquish, which is really, or Takedown, which is earlier on into the game. It doesn't die to most units. I just don't think the stat line plus the droid token creation is all that good, especially considering you have to sacrifice 2 other units to do so to pay 3 for this. And if you're playing this for 5 resources, well, now we've got like Podamarins and things like that that you can one-shot it, which is really quite weak. I think there's a lot of better payoffs for exploit, and I'm not super excited about this, but I could see it being a decent limited card. Next up, we got Rune, Hako, a 2-cost ground unit in Vigilance Villainy. It's a 3/2 separatist official, so a pretty solid aggressive stat line. When played, if a friendly unit was defeated this phase, you may give a unit -1/-1 for this phase. So obviously some more support for the exploit synergies, where if you defeat something, you still only get this -1/-1. Of course, if you're considering, okay, how will this happen naturally? You most likely are not going to be playing Rune Hako on turn 1, because you're not going to have anything that had died on turn 1. So this is more like a turn 2, turn 3, turn 4 option if you do want to get that when played ability, and you most certainly do. Now, it could potentially be that a 2-cost 3/2 Separatist with official tag is good enough to play in certain decks because Separatist might be relevant. But I would lean on the side of, if that is the case, it's like, okay, it's not amazing. I could see the when played trigger being pretty good if you're fighting against another unit exploit-based deck with battle droid tokens. That's where this gets pretty good. But also, just in general, giving something -1/-1 to help you win a combat, for example, could potentially just be really quite strong. I am hopeful for this card. I think the Separatist tag and the official tag really helps it out, as it might just be good enough for those reasons. And then the when played could just give it a little bit of extra value, since a 3/2 stat line is kind of at least what you're looking for. 2/2s are pretty mediocre. 2/3s are kind of meh. 3/2s I like a little bit more than 2/3s, and then 3/3s are really what we're looking for on 2 resources. So I could see some hope for Rune here. Next up, we got Battle Droid Legion, another exploit card. It's a 9-cost ground unit in Villainy. It's a 6/5 Separatist droid trooper. You got Christophsis in the background, by the way. It's exploit 2, so you can go ahead and pay 5 for this. And when you defeat Battle Droid Legion, you get to create 3 Battle Droid tokens. So first off, again, if we compare it to the troop transport that we saw earlier, we get a 5-cost 6/5, which is pretty solid. Like, that can go ahead and compete in the Podamarin area of things. So 6 power is pretty important. And then it's kind of interesting because it kind of exploits you into future exploits. And I actually do like this card, because the way I'm thinking about this is, like, let's say turn 1, you play some card, you're trading off early. Turn 2, you play like Droid Escort or something to set up your exploit cards. Let's say turn 3, you do exploit something out, but you still have some fodder left over, which is very reasonable because maybe you exploit something cheaper. And then turn 4 or turn 5 or whatever, you're exploiting out Battle Droid Legion. You trade off with one of their bigger units. You get then left with a bunch of exploit fodder for future exploits. This is potentially a really nice combination where you get to not only deploy to the board using your exploit fodder, but then also have more exploit fodder for later on in the game. And that's where I'm really seeing this card. I don't see this as a card you're going to want to play in Separatist Trooper decks and you exploit out some random stuff that you have. To me, this is looking like a very, very important mid-range portion or mid-game portion of the exploit deck to not only give you a big threat that is going to be able to trade off with bigger threats on your opponent's side of the battlefield, but also carry you into the later portions of the game. So I'm actually pretty hopeful for Battle Droid Legion in exploit decks. But as I said, we have a lot of exploit synergy, exploit support, not just within the first 3 cards, but also with a brand new leader in Nute Gunray. And I said, I am very excited with this leader because I think it's actually one of the strongest leaders that we've seen from set 3. And it's really all to do with this front half. Nute Gunray is a Vigilance, Villainy, Separatist official leader with the action to exhaust Nute Gunray. If 2 or more friendly units were defeated this phase, just create a Battle Droid token. 0 resource cost attached to it. That is extremely powerful. On the flip side, he flips for 6 resources, is a 2/8, so very tanky stat line, and just has on attack create a Battle Droid token. Realistically, the flip side of Nute Gunray is not crazy exciting, does have some powerful synergies potentially within the kind of exploit deck that you're looking for, giving you potentially 2 bodies to sacrifice, a nice tanky body to create more bodies to sacrifice. Really, all I care about, to be honest, is this front side. This front side to create another exploit fodder after you've exploited something out. If you think about this, this is essentially after you've gotten a 4 resource discount, you get 2 resources back. That's kind of how you want to think about this. Now, granted, some of the Battle Droid tokens can be interacted with in such a case where they attack your Battle Droid tokens and you just have them die. And so that could be a little bit unfortunate. Like, it's not guaranteed 2 resources like something New Han would be, for example, where you get to New Han and you just play whatever unit you want. This is more like, okay, as long as they're not interacting with my units, I could potentially get more resources back. But this looks like a pretty interesting exploit payoff, right? Because if you think about it, Count Dooku, which we saw earlier, which I thought was pretty good, it creates exploit options. Like, okay, I have the Separatist card I want to exploit out. I can do so with Count Dooku. Whereas Nute Gunray is like, oh, I'm exploiting stuff out. I get to replace those things that I exploited. And that seems pretty powerful to me. Granted, you could also just use this as a way to generate 1/1s on the battlefield, but getting free exploit fodder for future purposes does seem pretty strong to me. And heck, even though the flip is not a great stat line where 2/8 is kind of on the weaker side, I would love to have more power associated with Nute Gunray. It's not like he's going to die very easily, so you most likely will be able to get an on attack trigger and potentially set up for, like, let's say you flip Nute Gunray, you get an on attack trigger, maybe you could play an 8-drop that turn with exploit, right? Because you can sacrifice that Battle Droid token. Or maybe you just attack another unit that your opponent controls and you exploit out Nute Gunray and the Battle Droid token and play something that costs 10 because you'll have 6 resources when you flip Nute Gunray. There is some other options there. I am pretty excited about this. I think this is a pretty powerful front side ability. It just depends, again, on how many good exploit options we have and whether or not there's enough setup. Right now, so far in the cards that we've seen, we're getting some more payoffs, and I do think Battle Droid Legion is a nice kind of mid-game bridge, but I haven't really seen a truly powerful payoff at the end portion of the curve. I think Gore is potentially one of those payoffs, but not necessarily like the payoff that I'm really looking for. Although, there is a card here that it might be that card, and that is Malevolence. So, exploit 4, and again, if we were to go ahead and determine what exploit does, we can go ahead and go back into the previous versions of some cards like multi-troop transport. Exploit is defeat up to 2 units you control. This card costs 2 less for each unit defeated, so it doesn't reduce the actual cost reduction. It just reduces the controls how many cards you can actually sacrifice. So 9 cost space units. Malevolence, sweet art, by the way. Vigilance, Villainy, 7/7 Separatist capital ship vehicle. Exploit 4, restore 2. When played, give an enemy unit -4/-0. It can't attack for this phase. So the thing I'm looking at is the fact that it's a space unit and the fact that it has restore 2. That's the thing that I'm looking at. To be honest, the when played trigger isn't insane. It can potentially allow you to survive to where Restore 2 would do some stuff with Malevolence. But with Exploit 4, let's say you were to sacrifice 4 units to go ahead and play Malevolence, you're getting an 8 resource cost reduction on this to play it for 1 resource, which is kind of crazy, okay? And if you think about it, like let's say turn 1 you play something, turn 2 you play Droid Escort. I know I talk about Battle Droid Escort, but it's like the perfect setup card for these exploit decks. That's 3 things to sacrifice. By turn 3, you could be getting down a 7/7 space unit with also having a Battle Droid token left over, preventing your opponent from attacking, or at least 1 unit from attacking, and having Restore 2. The thing I think that is scary about that type of setup is Fell the Dragon kills Malevolence, Rivals Fall kills Malevolence, Vanquish kills Malevolence. There's a lot of ways to deal with single unit threats. That is the thing that I'm thinking that's going to hold back exploit decks from really functioning. But Malevolence does seem like an option that's going to really do what you want when you do exploit, restoring you back up, giving you a space unit that actually closes out the game extremely quickly, and also preventing some damage for that phase can all be very powerful things to do. So I am hopeful, and I do think this is a pretty sweet exploit card. Next up, we got Clone Cohort. This is a 2-cost upgrade in aggression. It simply gives attached unit gains raid 2, and when defeated, create a Clone Trooper token, +0/+0. So very aggressively focused upgrade. The idea behind it, I'm imagining, is you put it on something, you attack into a more powerful unit, you get to trade with it, you get a Clone Trooper token as a result, or you just keep attacking your opponent's base with raid 2, and then they deal with it, and you get a Clone Trooper token as a result. If you just see this as a 2-resource upgrade that says create a Clone Trooper token, I could see that doing some work in some decks, in terms of just giving you like maybe some exploit synergy that gives you some Clone Trooper tokens. But realistically, that's going to be a very weak side of things, because a 2-resource, any play that gives you just a 2/2 is pretty weak. You really got to take advantage of the raid 2 either by trading up or hitting their base. To me, this seems pretty weak, and I don't know if I would really be playing this card, because the fact that you are forced to be the one that attacks makes it a lot weaker. Because as I said, if you're trying to trade up into something and your opponent plays Clone Cohort on a unit, you're probably going to be taking out that unit before they have the option to get massive value on you. So not a huge fan of Clone Cohort. On the other hand, we have Droid Cohort, and this is a little bit different because it's 1 resource, it's in Cunning, and it says attached unit gains when defeated, create a Battle Droid token, but it just gets you straight up a +1/+1 stat line. That is a lot more exciting to me, because again, you are not forced to attack. It's 1 resource cheaper, and you could do that whole thing where you're trading up into something and still get some fodder left behind. This to me is like 1 resource, kind of like a shoot first type effect, where you are, or a surprise strike into an opponent's unit type effect, where you're able to go ahead and kill their units and you get the Battle Droid token if it dies. I think there's one crucial element to both of these cards that preventing them from being really solid and actually playable, because I think this is potentially a decent draft card, but I don't see it being played in Premiere. And the main reason for that is it doesn't give you immediate action economy. The reason why Surprise Strike, Snapshot Reflexes, those types of cards are even considered is because it immediately allows you to attack. Without that, I'm not really seeing Droid Cohort or Clone Cohort being played at all, but we will have to see. Next up, we got Obedient Vanguard, a 1-cost ground unit in command. It's a 1/1 Separatist Droid Trooper, and it's raid 1, plus when defeated, you may give a trooper unit +2/+2 for this phase. So 1 resource, 1/1s. I am hopeful for this because, again, we're in the coordinate exploit style of deck, and you can exploit this to give you some value. I love the art, by the way. This seems to me actually way more important in a coordinate deck than it does an exploit deck. I'm thinking about this where you play a couple 1 resource plays on turn 1, and then this probably you maybe get an attack in with it. Maybe you trade with something if you're lucky enough, and then it dies. You get some +2/+2 going on, and you're able to attack in for even more points of damage. And while you're at it, it's a 1 resource play to go ahead and trigger coordinate. I'm a little bit worried that it's a 1 resource 1/1 because it's a card from your hand that's a 1/1 that really just dies to basically everything. Even Battle Droid tokens it trades with, which is really, really scary. So I'm not 100% sure that I'm really convinced by this card, but the fact that it does have a when defeated trigger and it's almost always going to die and can trigger coordinate is a little bit exciting to me. If there's some sort of aggressive exploit deck where you exploit something out, and since you're playing it with exploit, you can go ahead and give that +2/+2, I believe, to the card that was exploited out. I could see some power in there, maybe like a Gore, but I'm not a huge proponent for Obedient Vanguard. How many cards do we have left? I think it's just this one and one more. Nameless Valor is the next one up. This one's a 1-cost upgrade in command attached to a token unit. Attached unit gains Overwhelm and +2/+2. So this is a really powerful stat line for just one resource. This is one resource, Overwhelm +2/+2. That is way more powerful than any upgrade that we have in the game, realistically. If you compare it to like Boba Fett's armor, for example, it's 2 resources to give the +2/+2 stat line. Granted, all the other upgrades usually give you something else, but just in terms of stat points, this is a really, really powerful amount of stats for one resource. The restriction is the fact that it has to go in a token unit. So if you look at the token units that we have, that's like Battle Droid tokens or Clone Trooper tokens, most likely going to be in a Clone Trooper token, hence why it's Nameless Valor and there's a Clone Trooper blasting away on Battle Droids. This is a 4/4 Clone Trooper now with Overwhelm. If you think about it, you go turn 1, create some Clone Trooper tokens. Turn 2, you do some more generation of Clone Troopers or whatever, and you play Nameless Valor on a Clone Trooper token that you generated. Suddenly you have a 4/4 Overwhelm. That's going to be able to kill basically everything on turn 1 and turn 2. And with Overwhelm, you actually get to do damage to your opponent's base. And it's not like they can just ignore this. It's a 4/4. 4/4s get in a lot of damage and can do some major work. This is something that I could see potentially doing some work because it's so cheap. If it was 2 resources, I would say it's unplayable. 1 resource, I could see it being played. There is a big downside to it, however, and that is token units can be waylaid and they won't come back, and you just lose Nameless Valor. They can be just captured and be lost, and Nameless Valor goes to the discard pile. It can be killed. There's so many different things that could go wrong with token units. So we'll see how the meta shapes up and whether or not it is realistic to actually get a token unit out on the battlefield. Right now, I think it's a little bit tough. Like Batch Brothers is one of the few good ways. There's some pure token generation at cards, but other than that, I'm not really seeing a great way. However, it's a lot of stats. It's a lot of things, and with Overwhelm and the +2/+2 to actually keep your unit alive while also hitting them, while also killing units for very low resources. So maybe some potential there. Lastly, one of the most flavorful cards from the set, in my opinion. It is a legendary. It is a 3-cost event in Cunning. Now there are 2 of them. If you control exactly 1 unit, play a non-vehicle unit from your hand that shares a trait with the unit you control. It costs 5 less. So let's think about this. First off, what is a trait? A trait is any sort of tag, I guess you'd say, that's in the text box of the unit. So for example, if I were to pull up a card here, if we look at, like, let's say outspoken representative, it would be a Republic official. Those are its traits. So if you think about this, let's just look into kind of what we've got going on in Cunning and what we've got going on in set 2. For example, if we were to play this right now, again, we need a trait that copies something else. And how can we set this up? Well, if I type in, let's just go to the filters and let's set sort by Shadows of the Galaxy, and we want aspect Cunning, and we want to type in Underworld because that's a very common one, right? Okay, so we got the Underworld tag, we got the Cunning, we got Shadows of the Galaxy. Let's say on turn 1 you play a Dr. Evazan, right? Well, guess what? On turn 2, you play Now There Are 2 of them, and remember, you have to control exactly 1 unit. You are able to play a non-vehicle unit that shares a trait with the unit you control. So we play Dr. Evazan on turn 1. You can play Zuckuss turn 2. That is really powerful. Okay. If you wanted to, you could play a Forlom on turn 2, which is also pretty powerful. If you had like another Underworld card, let's say you go L337 on turn 1. Again, any Underworld card, you could play like Tobias Beckett on turn 2 if you wanted to. Heck, you could go like Zori Bliss on turn 2 if you wanted to look at like Rebels, for example. Rebel, and we pull up, instead of Shadows of the Galaxy, we pull up Spark of Rebellion. and we look into cunning, again, this is just the cunning options. Remind you, we can expand this past cunning because it's not requiring you to share aspects. It's just the fact that it requires you to have the same trait. So there are a lot of kind of units around that we could do. But if we go rebels and we were like, okay, or heck, you could even do, you know, some crazy different rebels. Like, okay, I want a Chewbacca here. That's an underworld card, of course, and so is Han Solo. Most of the cunning cards don't have the rebel tag, I suppose. But let's say you play Bodhi Rook and you want to get down a rebel card afterwards. Well, guess what? If he's the only unit you control, you could play something like Rook Gorilla Attack Pod on the following turn, which can be pretty strong. And remember, it's just share a trait. It has to be non-vehicle. But let's say you go turn one like Millennium Falcon with like Han Solo decks. You could play some really powerful underworld cards on turn 2. You could even play a 6 resource underworld card on turn 1 or turn 2 with Han Solo, OG Han as your unit leader with this card. That's just how crazy this card could potentially be. So I think this has some massive, massive implications for Premier. This might just be the strongest card we've seen of the entire set, just for the potential that it has. You could even do some crazy stuff, again, outside of cunning. This is not limited to cunning purely. It's just that it requires you to have a very focused deck, and it requires you to have non-vehicles in your deck. I could see this be one of the most powerful cards in set 3, however. Let me know what you think, guys. Let me know what you think about Nute Gunray, a bunch of the exploit cards. Let me know what you think about now there are 2 of them. This was definitely a more exploit focused. Lots of when defeated triggers, lots of things that power up or do things when things have been defeated, all that stuff. So big focus on exploit, and I'm pretty excited about it. Let me know what you think about tokens and Nameless, valor, all that type of stuff. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.